Hi everyone, it's Nicole for Simon Says Stamp with the July 2023 edition of Making the Cut. Making the Cut is my series here on Simon Says Stamp where we talk about all things die cutting. Today we're going to create a beautiful vase of flowers using a lot of dies from Simon Says Stamp, but combining them with this jar die from Honeybee Stamps. So it is awesome to mix and match the supplies from your stash to make it truly custom. Sometimes you might have an idea for some dies or even stamps in your stash, but you don't have everything within one brand. Don't be afraid to go to your stash and shop your stash and see what you might have. Today I was looking for a jar or a vase and I came across this mason jar from Honeybee Stamps in my stash and thought, wouldn't this make the perfect vase for these brand new flowers from Simon Says Stamp? So today we're using the sunrise stem, the layered perky flower, and the layered dandy flower for our beautiful vase of florals. I am inking up my images with Pawsitively saturated inks. We're going to use a couple of shades of green. I used Sprout, and then we're going to use Fairway. And I'm even going to pull in some teals or aquas to just give a little bit more of a bluish tint to my leaves today. Each of these flower die sets comes with multiple pieces to layer and give you that wonderful texture. For my flowers, I'm using guava, watermelon, and cherry for these flowers. And this again is the layered perky flower. The size of these just works perfectly with the mason jar from Honeybee Stamps. Each layer is going to be a different color of ink to gradually deepen and darken the bloom. That gives it a lot of beautiful texture. Now, once I get each flower inked up, I am going to go ahead and assemble them one by one to kind of keep everything even in my mind or sorted out in my mind, because there's a lot of little parts and pieces going on here. I love starting with white cardstock and then building that color with my inks or other coloring mediums. Here's a little bit of the blue ink or the teal. And now I'm going to go ahead and grab some glue and start attaching. And tweezers are going to be fantastic here just to kind of help keep your fingers out of the ink, out of the glue, all of those things. So we'll go ahead and do the first one. And I realized I should have inked all the way down to the bottom. So we're just going to take our ink blending brush and do that while we're holding it with our tweezers. Sometimes that happens, that's okay. And then we're going to take our small bloom and we will layer this one. Now you could do a vase filled with all of the same flowers if you want to. I wanted a lot of different texture, almost like a little mason jar filled with wildflowers that you might get from a child. That was kind of my imagining for this card. So now we're going to go and do the same thing for our second group of stems. These stems go with the sunrise stem die, which is absolutely beautiful. So I've layered on a little bit of the Sprout. Then we're going to go in with some field ink instead of Fairway this time, a little bit deeper and darker green. I honestly think all of the stems ended up looking about the same by the time I add in my teal color. For the blooms for these two flowers, we're going to do one in oranges and one in yellows. But first we got to get all these stems colored. And again, back to a little teal, and I'm just going to blend in a little bit of that on each of the leaves. Some more than others. I love that little hint of blue. or aqua, I guess I should say. All right, we're going to move these over to the side now. And we have our flowers. So I'll be using melon, cantaloupe, and sherbet for our first flower. And then the center is going to be citrine. There are 3 pieces for the sunrise stem and 3 pieces for each of the layered dandy flower. I'm actually only using the small layered dandy flower and not the large one. Now I want to give you an idea for the layered dandy flower and the sunrise stem. Because the stem is separate in sunrise stem than the layered dandy flower, you could easily take the stem from one and use it with the other. So I think picking up both of those is excellent and gives you a lot of options. You may even have other bloom dies in your collection that you could use with this stem. I love that it's separate. You can cut it apart. You're going to see me cut mine apart here in a little bit. It just works really, really well with other dies you might already own. And there's my little yellow flower center. It looks so good. I love these flowers. Now, because I didn't use the large layered dandy flower, I felt like it was just too similar in size to the sunrise stem. And I wanted different textures, I guess, is what I was going for. I'm going to use the small, but I'm not going to cut any extra stems for it. We've got a lot of stems going on, a lot of leaves. I'm just going to tuck one of my little layered dandy flower into the floral arrangement, and then the other 2 are almost going to be like blooms that have fallen off of our, stems and fallen around our vase. That was kind of my imagining for this particular design. I'm only going to ink the one layered dandy flower on camera, and then I did 2 additional ones mostly after I built my arrangement and saw what else I thought I needed. I had already die cut one more of the small flowers, but I didn't ink it because I didn't know if I was going to use it or not. But ultimately, I ended up having to die cut another one for my card. Now, the reason I came to a slimline style design for this particular card was when I laid everything out prior to die cutting and inking, I could see that it was going to be tall, not necessarily wide. A lot of times I let the style of card dictate what size card I end up using for the final design. And for this card, the skinny tall design really works perfectly with what we have going on. So don't be afraid to try different card sizes depending on what you're working on and what works best. For the mason jar, it's a 2-piece die set from Honeybee Stamps. I'm going to ink it up with Seafoam and Surf. I die cut it from white cardstock, and then I also die cut it from pearlescent vellum from Lawn Fawn. And the vellum is going to overlap the white vase. I want my white vase as the kind of the background, or the back of the jar, if you will. And that way, at the top of the jar, I can slide the stems down underneath and you can see them peeking through the glass of the jar. So only along that very tippy top, that little skinny section, am I going to add my glue. I'm going to leave the bottom of the jar open for now, as it gives me an easy way to manipulate my stems. I'm working on my glass mat so that I can clean it up easily as I'm working as well. So now here is one of those stems, and I'm just tucking it down, and I kind of had thought that I need to trim off one of the leaves from this stem because it just wasn't letting me tuck it into the jar very nicely. And then I'm going to start playing around with the floral arrangement. You might want to hold on to that leaf that you cut off. In fact, you're going to see me add that back to the design later. I can kind of tuck it in and make my arrangement and the greenery a little fuller by using it somewhere else, but sometimes it's kind of hard to get all of those leaves and things tucked down into the actual jar or vase itself. So I am going to assemble a couple of my flowers here, using my tweezers to help hold things down and in place. And let's go ahead and attach our orange bloom. And then I'm going to carefully place everything in the jar once the glue is dry. So something good to do while the glue is drying is I wanted to have some sort of an interesting background and not just have a plain white background for my slimline card. Simon Says Stamp has lots of amazing slimline style stencils. And this is bubble wrap. It is one of my all-time favorites. And I am going to go ahead and take this and some surf ink or seafoam, and I'm going to lightly apply this. Now, one of the reasons I love this stencil is it's a repeating pattern. I did end up having to move it down just a little bit to fit perfectly. Like, I wanted to hang off the edge. It would fit, but I wanted the circles to go off the edge of my card panel, and I am stenciling straight on the card base. I didn't use a separate sheet of paper. And I'm doing a very light inking, but I'm just moving my stencil down, up or down, to move and get that design all the way down my panel. Really light, and oh my goodness, I think I'm gonna love it. I think that's gonna be super, super sweet. I'm gonna grab my splatter box and some Salvage Patina Distress Spray. This is the regular Distress Spray, not the oxide. And we're going to splatter a few little droplets for additional interest on the background of our card design. Then I am going to start building my floral arrangement. By leaving the bottom of that vellum open, it allows me to kind of add little bits of glue to the stem down below to secure each flower. And I'm going to manipulate my flowers so that they're kind of in front of each other, much like a real floral arrangement would look. And I just suggest taking your time, working with all of these flowers. I know I had to move close to myself. I'm sorry. I'm just going to slide this last one down in between. And I like different heights for my flowers. So you can see the orange is kind of the highest. Then we've got red, then we've got yellow, and then we've got another red, and purple is going to be at the very bottom. So now I'm only putting glue up at the top of my jar and of the flowers. Why am I not putting it at the bottom? Well, I will show you. I wanted to go ahead and secure my jar and florals to my card, but I think around a mason jar, a little bit of twine gives it a beautiful little rustic finish. So I'm going to grab some Lawn Fawn Lawn Trimmings twine and wrap that around the top of the jar, tie it into a little bow, and then we can easily just kind of lift up the jar a little bit and put a little glue down below. So here's my little purple layered dandy flower bloom that I'm going to tuck in, and that's perfect. I love that there's 5 flowers. I think that that is the perfect mix, that odd number of blooms. And now I'm just simply wrapping my twine around my jar. This is like the natural color, but any of the Lawn Trimmings twine would look really pretty here. Or if you have some other ribbon or something like that, it's just a fun little decorative touch. Now we're going to tie it into a bow right on the front of our card. Now, just like vellum, vellum is hard to hide adhesive. So I don't want to leave the flap of my jar open, but we are going to layer over a die cut greeting and the jar lid plus a cup or a flower. And because we're going to be layering those pieces, I don't need to worry about glue quite yet because I can hide glue underneath those other elements. It's always good to kind of be thinking ahead when you're using vellum, how you can hide your adhesive. So here I've got my jar lid out of some silver cardstock. I've got my foil plate, looking to see what I want to use for my greeting. I'm going to go ahead and apply some glossy accents to my flower centers, and let's warm up our glimmer hot foil system. We're going to use the modern or elegantly modern foil plate. I'm going to use the Love You. And because our jar lid, I die cut that from silver mirror cardstock from Simon Says Stamp, I'm going to use some silver foil for my greeting to tie it all together. This has coordinating dies that go with it, so I am going to foil this on hammer mill cardstock first. We'll wait for that to heat up, run that through our die cutting machine, and then use the coordinating die to die cut it. And it die cuts it so beautifully around all those loops and swirls. Let me move that out of the way. A lot of times I like to kind of let my foil cool a minute before I peel it off. I've found that that has worked really well lately. Oh my goodness, look how pretty that is. I'm going to line up the coordinating die and run that through my die cutting machine. And my best suggestion for that is to just make sure that the the adhesive doesn't go over a foiled area, because it can lift up some of the foiling. All right, so let's grab our card and we're going to lay out our greeting and figure out where we want the rest of our sentiment to go. I sort of want the rest of the sentiment to look like it's etched on this quote unquote glass mason jar. So the greeting from the Elegantly Modern is exactly as you are. I'm going to figure out where I want that to go, place my card in my MISTI, and then I want to stamp that with clear embossing and watermark ink and heat emboss with white embossing powder. It probably would have been easier to do this before I tied my twine into a little bow, but we're going to make it work. If your Glossy Accents is still wet, I would suggest waiting to do this so that you aren't picking up the Glossy Accents with the lid of your MISTI. However, my card had been sitting for a little bit and was completely dry. So now I am going to prep my vellum with the Simon Says Stamp powder tool, stamp my greeting with the embossing and watermark ink, and heat emboss with the white embossing powder. I love that the jar serves as part of the embellishment on the card, but also a great place to house our sentiment. Oh yeah, that's gonna look so good. I am loving this card so much. So now I am going to make sure my heat tool is nice and warm, and then I'm going to take it to the vellum. I don't want to touch my card or have my heat to my card very much, because I don't want that vellum to warp. And then I'm going to take some glue, and we are going to attach our greeting. That little leaf I cut off earlier, I went ahead and just glued that down to fill out the left side of our vase. And then the Love You goes right above the Exactly As You Are. And then we have our jar lid, and we're going to have a couple of the blooms. So let's glue the jar lid, and then when we have that, we can lift up our vellum, and we're going to hide adhesive back behind our greeting and that jar lid like I mentioned earlier, and that's going to help keep the vellum nice and flat. I'm using acrylic blocks to help hold everything down while the glue is drying. And then the final bloom, I want it to look like it's kind of fallen back behind the lid and the mason jar, but I've already glued the back of the jar down, so I'm going to just cut off a tiny bit of that and lay it right there, and I can cut off the rest when that glue has dried. So now it's time for finishing embellishments. The majority of our card is all put together. As I was looking at this, I felt like we needed probably some little pearls, a little heart accent, but how about some ladybugs? These doodlebug shape sprinkles, I know this is the fall set, but they have these darling ladybugs in there, and I thought they would be so stinking cute on a couple of the blooms. So we're going to grab the ladybugs. We're going to have one up high, and then we're going to take the other one and put her down on one of the blooms that have fallen down next to the base of our little mason jar. I love those. I think they're just a fun little unexpected touch. And they're sized to fit or go with this this scale of this card. Now we're going to take some of these beautiful pretty pink posh pearls and we're going to scatter these throughout the card. I'm only going to use this one color. I'm not going to use multiple. This is Seafoam. I think it works perfectly with our background color. And we're just going to pop these, some on the leaves and some around. And then we're going to take a little white heart and pop that right underneath our greeting. Just one little white heart, and that will finish our design. Thank you guys so much for joining me today for the July 2023 edition of Making the Cut. The supplies I used to create my card are listed and linked below the video here on YouTube for your convenience. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Hi there, I'm Heidi, Simon's mama and founder at simonsaysstamp.com. Thank you so much for watching our video. If you like what you just saw, be sure to press the thumbs up and subscribe to see more great content.